The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Union was a vast dome of shimmering light, a construct of impossible geometry where the most powerful beings in the universe deliberated over matters of peace, war, and interspecies cooperation. It was a place where civilizations rose and fell with a flick of a tentacle, a claw, or a pulsating mass of gelatinous thought. Ambassador Rachel Vance stood at the center of it all, her figure dwarfed by the grandiosity of the chamber, but her presence unshaken. She had faced warlords, tyrants, and species that communicated through spores, yet none had unnerved her as much as the Portland High Speaker, a creature resembling a sentient, elongated toad with 12 bulbous eyes and a crown of neural filaments that swayed like sea anemones. The diplomatic negotiations had been going poorly, as expected. The Galactic Union, in its bureaucratic arrogance, viewed humanity as an unruly, primitive species, too young, too volatile, too emotional to be taken seriously. The only reason Earth had a seat at the table at all was due to its rapid technological advancements and an inconvenient reality. They were expanding at an alarming rate. The Union found humans fascinating but also troublesome, much like an intelligent pet that had suddenly learned how to use tools. Rachel knew how they saw her. A human woman, small and fragile, trying to navigate the power games of species that had conquered stars before her ancestors discovered fire. But she had come prepared. She had studied their customs, their histories, their endless bureaucratic nonsense. She had rehearsed every possible insult they might throw at her, and she was determined to prove that humanity belonged here. It began, as it always did, with condescension. Ambassador Vance, the Portland High Speaker, intoned, its voice like the slow gurgling of a tar pit. Your species is aggressive, unpredictable, and emotionally unstable. These are not traits of a civilization ready for integration. Rachel forced a polite smile. And yet, we've mastered interstellar travel in record time. Your archives show that the Reflorians took 25,000 years to reach that stage. We did it in under 300. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The Reflorians, a species resembling crystalline mantises, clicked their mandibles in irritation. The Portland ignored them. Your kind's penchant for violence is of particular concern, the speaker continued, peering down at her with all 12 of its oily eyes. Even now, your species engages in brutal internal conflicts. Rachel spread her hands. Conflict is how we grow. It's how we evolve. We push ourselves beyond limits. That's why we're here. The Portland's filaments quivered, a gesture Rachel had learned to interpret as disdain. Your evolution is precisely why you remain under observation. We granted you this audience as a courtesy, but it leaned forward. The Galactic Union does not negotiate with predators. The words carried a finality that caused a shift in the room. Rachel felt the weight of 1,000 alien gazes upon her, watching, waiting for her to react. She knew she had just been dismissed. For a brief moment, she let herself feel it, the frustration, the unfairness of it all. She had fought to be here, not just for herself, but for Earth, for the billions of lives that deserved a future among the stars. But if she showed weakness now, she would validate everything they already believed about humans. So she did what she did best. She remained composed. Well, Rachel said, exhaling slowly. That's disappointing. She turned to leave, but the Portland raised a limb. There is one final matter, it said. A test, if you will. Rachel hesitated. She had read their protocols front to back, and no test was mentioned. The floor beneath her shifted. Suddenly, a section of the chamber retracted, revealing a large, circular arena. The air crackled with energy as a containment field shimmered into existence, trapping her inside. Rachel's blood ran cold. A massive, quadrupedal creature descended from the ceiling, lowered into the arena by mechanical restraints. It was a hulking beast with chitinous armor, razor-like appendages, and a maw lined with rotating mandibles. The creature sniffed the air, its reptilian eyes narrowing as it locked onto her. The trial of worthiness, the Portland announced, sounding almost amused. A simple demonstration of your species' true nature. Rachel took a step back, heart pounding. This wasn't part of the negotiations. The speaker's filaments undulated in what might have been laughter. Consider it a final decision maker. If you are to join us, prove that your species is adaptable. Rachel looked up at the stands, where various diplomats and alien dignitaries watched with detached curiosity. This was a spectacle, not a test. A lesson in power. They knew she had no weapons. They expected her to fail. The creature snarled. Rachel had spent her entire life preparing for battles of wit and diplomacy, not gladiatorial combat against a star beast. But she also knew something about humans that the Galactic Union had clearly overlooked. They never knew when to quit. The beast lunged. Rachel rolled to the side, barely avoiding a swipe of its massive claw. She scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. She needed a strategy. Needed to stall. Needed. The creature pounced again, its claws tearing through the air just inches from her face. She dodged barely, but her foot slipped, and she went sprawling across the arena floor. The audience erupted in laughter. Rachel forced herself up, her breath ragged. She could hear the Portland speaker's voice, thick with amusement. A predictable outcome. The creature charged. And then, a sharp, deafening sound echoed through the chamber. A gunshot. The beast's head jerked back violently, a hole appearing right between its eyes. It collapsed instantly, its body convulsing before going still. Silence fell over the chamber. Rachel stared in shock, panting, as the creature lay lifeless before her. Her gaze shifted to where the shot had come from. The containment field had been breached, and standing there, calmly lowering a smoking pistol, was a lone figure. The murmurs in the chamber turned into outright panic. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. John, the man dressed in a sleek black suit, his hair falling slightly over his cold, calculating eyes, holstered his weapon with an ease that sent a chill through the gathered dignitaries. The Portland speaker, still seated in its grand podium, stared down at the human with a mixture of confusion and unease. "Who are you?" John Vance lifted his gaze, his expression unreadable. "I'm her husband." The words landed like a meteor impact. The chamber erupted into chaos, alien dignitaries shouting over one another. The Portland speaker shifted uneasily, eyes darting toward its guards, who were already raising their weapons. "You dare violate." Another gunshot. A plasma rifle clattered to the floor, its wielder collapsing with a hole in his forehead. John turned his attention back to the Portland, his voice unervingly calm. "You killed my wife." The Portland faltered. She was unworthy, an expendable representa. John fired again. The speaker's crown of neural filaments exploded in a shower of bioelectric light as its grotesque head snapped back. The chamber fell deathly silent. John reloaded his pistol with slow, deliberate movements. He exhaled, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his gaze before he turned to Rachel. "Are you hurt?" Rachel swallowed. "I know, I'm fine." He nodded once. Then, he turned back to the chamber, full of terrified aliens. A Forlic official stammered. "The entire Union will come for you. You cannot possibly expect to survive." John Vance stepped forward, expression unchanging. "I'm not here to survive." He chambered another round. "I'm here to kill every last one of you." And then he moved. The Galactic Council's chambers had descended into absolute panic. The dignitaries, once so smug in their power, scrambled over one another, shrieking in a cacophony of alien tongues. 100 species, each with their own laws, weapons, and armies, had just realized they had made a grave mistake. John Vance was not a man. He was an event, a force of nature. And now he had become their extinction-level threat. The security forces inside the council chambers had hesitated for just a moment, unsure whether to attack. That hesitation had cost them everything. John moved with the efficiency of a machine. No wasted effort, no flourish, just pure, calculated precision. His pistol snapped up. 2 shots. The nearest guards collapsed before they had even registered what had happened. He was already moving, shifting between cover, firing again. Plasma bolts erupted around him, hissing against the marble floors. burning through the grand banners of the Galactic Union. Rachel Vance could only watch, half in awe, half in horror. John was outnumbered, outgunned, fighting against the most advanced warriors in the known universe. It didn't matter. The Dreadstorm Guard had been trained for war, but they had not been trained for him. He was inside their guard before they could react, moving faster than they thought possible. The next closest guard swung a razor-edged glaive toward him, but John ducked beneath it, twisting his pistol sideways. One shot under the helmet, straight through the throat. The alien gurgled, collapsing. John caught the falling body, twisting it toward the others to absorb a barrage of plasma fire. He dropped the corpse, switched weapons. One guard rushed him, some kind of reptilian brute wearing an exosuit. A hulking thing, its armor thick enough to withstand anti-tank rounds. John shot it in the knee. The joint collapsed, sending the beast lurching forward, directly into John's waiting knife. He plunged the blade into the weak spot between its collarbone and helmet, twisting as the creature let out a strangled shriek. Something behind him whined, a plasma turret charging up. John pivoted, tossing his pistol. It tumbled through the air just as the turret fired, but the gun's trajectory interrupted the blast, absorbing the energy just long enough for John to dive sideways, snatching a fallen rifle from the ground. 3 shots. The turret exploded in a rain of molten metal. The Galactic Council had expected a barbarian, a primitive warrior relying on brute strength. Instead, they had found themselves facing a ghost, an executioner who moved without hesitation, without remorse. John didn't just fight. He dismantled. The Portland speaker's corpse still twitched on the floor where John had executed him, and now more guards poured into the chamber, desperate to contain the situation. The high-ranking officials scrambled for the exits, their cowardice betraying the fragility of their authority. Rachel saw the opening. She sprinted toward the nearest console, shoving aside a cowering diplomat. "Earth needs to see this," she muttered, fingers flying over the alien interface. The Galactic Union had censored the execution of their human diplomat, broadcasting only a sterilized version of events to the other planets. But now, they were going to witness what came next. With a final tap of the console, she activated full broadcast transmission. The holofeeds lit up across the galaxy. Every species, every government tuned in. And they saw him, John Vance, the lone human, walking through the most powerful government in the galaxy, as if it were his house. The next wave of guards wasn't like the first. The Dreadstorm elite stormed in, their armor nearly impenetrable, wielding energy weapons powerful enough to melt reinforced starship hulls. John exhaled. He was getting tired, but tired didn't mean weak. He rolled forward, scooping up a discarded plasma rifle, firing before his feet even touched the ground. The first elite's faceplate shattered. He swung the rifle like a club into the second one's jaw, breaking it clean in half. Another came at him from the left. Too close. John abandoned the rifle, snatching the alien's own knife from its belt. The creature was nearly twice his size, but it didn't matter. They all died the same. A quick, brutal slice across the throat, then a hard shove, using the collapsing body as cover against the next attacker. One guard tried to retreat. John shot him in the spine. Another tried to surrender. John didn't care. The last guard, some insectoid creature with too many legs, turned and ran. John let him. He had bigger problems. The alarms had fully activated now, and outside, the planetary defense forces were mobilizing. Gunships hovered in the sky, armed to the teeth. Armored tanks rolled onto the Council's landing platforms. And worst of all, the fleet had arrived. Rachel saw the incoming ships on the broadcast. "John," she called, her voice laced with urgency. "We need to get out of here." John reloaded, checked his remaining ammunition. 4 rounds. He turned to Rachel. "Go." Rachel hesitated. "John, I'll catch up." She wanted to argue, wanted to remind him that this was suicide, that no man could fight an entire planet alone. But then she saw the look in his eyes. John Vance had stopped fighting for survival a long time ago. Now, He was just finishing what they started. Rachel nodded. She took one last look at him, the last thing these aliens would ever see, and sprinted toward the nearest exit. John exhaled. He cracked his neck. And then he walked straight toward the army, waiting outside. The first war mech opened fire, unleashing a barrage of high-intensity plasma. John moved before it did, rolling between cover, grabbing a fallen plasma launcher, firing as he slid. The mech's left leg exploded, sending the hulking machine crashing to the ground. Another mech rushed forward, deploying a dozen automated drones to flank him. John ducked just in time to let two of the drones shoot each other. He snatched one from midair, turned it around, and sent it flying into the mech's cockpit, detonating in a blinding explosion. By now, the Galactic forces had realized the truth. Their weapons weren't enough. Their armor wasn't enough. Their numbers weren't enough. John wasn't stopping. The battlefield became a graveyard. A war waged by one man. The fleet overhead sent down reinforcements, elite troopers equipped with personalized shielding, thought to be impenetrable. John tested that theory. He grabbed a fallen energy blade, something sleek and surgically lethal, and closed the distance before they could react. He cut through their defenses not with brute force, but with precision. A thrust to the ribs, between armor joints. A twist of the wrist to disable movement. A final, merciless strike to the throat. One by one they fell. The Grand Commander of the Union's defense forces, a towering, four-armed colossus, watched from the safety of his warship above. And he felt fear. No human should have been capable of this. And yet, the bodies told a different story. John stood alone in the wreckage, surrounded by the corpses of soldiers, machines, and war beasts. The battle had lasted minutes. Rachel's voice crackled over his earpiece. "John, I found a way off-world. We need to go." John looked up. Gunships still hovered. Troops still gathered. They had not learned their lesson. He took a step forward, reloading. Rachel's voice came again, softer this time. "John." He exhaled and turned away. The Galactic Union had thrown everything they had at one human, and they had lost. But the war? The war had just begun. The Galactic Council's throne chamber was in ruins. Bodies littered the Grand Hall. Banners of the Union lay in smoldering tatters, and the once pristine marble floors were stained with the blood of dozens of species. The security forces that had prided themselves on their tactical superiority were gone, exterminated, eliminated, erased. And the man responsible stood amidst the destruction, calmly reloading his pistol. John Vance had left the chamber, but the terror of his presence still lingered in the air like smoke after a wildfire. Across the stars, the entire galaxy was watching. Every feed, every transmission, every government tuned in as the legend unfolded in real time. The Galactic Union, an empire that had stood unchallenged for millennia, had unknowingly declared war on a single man. And now they were scrambling to survive. In the war room of the High Command, Supreme Chancellor Valek was pacing, his normally luminous skin flickering in erratic pulses of anxiety. His 12 appendages quivered as he listened to the reports streaming in. The transmissions were filled with screaming, with desperate calls for backup, with officers stammering about how their best soldiers had been slaughtered by a man with kinetic weaponry and primitive combat tactics. "This is unacceptable," he growled, slamming a clawed limb on the table. The holographic display flickered, showing the devastation below. Smoke billowed from the Council citadel. Ships hovered in formation, and the bodies of the Dreadstorm Guard lay motionless. John Vance had left the battlefield, but his presence was an open wound that bled into the very morale of the Union's forces. One of his advisors, a reptilian official from the Zephlorian Dominion, swallowed nervously. "Supreme Chancellor, we must accept the truth. This human is unlike anything we faced before." Valek bared his teeth, an eerie hiss emanating from his elongated throat. "No, this is humanity revealing its true nature. This is what we feared. They do not conquer with diplomacy. They do not seek peace. They are monsters wearing the faces of intelligent beings." Another commander, an amphibious creature with pulsating glands along its neck, croaked, With all due respect, Supreme Chancellor, we have no data to confirm that all humans are like this. Perhaps he is an anomaly. Valak let out a low, guttural sound that could have been laughter or fury. Anomaly? He is alone. We are the Galactic Union. If we cannot kill one human, then we deserve to be hunted. The other officials exchanged uneasy glances. Deploy the fleet. Every available warship, every drone unit, every ground soldier, Valak commanded. I want him drowned in fire. A nervous diplomat raised a tendril-like limb. And if that fails? The Supreme Chancellor's voice dropped to a whisper. Then we bring the exterminatus protocol. We burn his world. The room fell silent. Even the most war-hardened generals flinched at the words. Destroying a homeworld was a measure reserved for the most unspeakable of threats. The Council had only ever considered it twice, against species that posed existential threats to galactic stability. To do so now against a single human? Desperate times. Desperate measures. The fleet moved quickly. The High Admiral of the Union Armada, an insectoid named Escarel, personally oversaw the operation. He had fought in 12 wars, conquered entire systems, and brought species to their knees in the name of the Union. Yet as he watched the battle reports flood in, he felt something new. Fear. This is impossible, he muttered, his mandibles clicking erratically. It wasn't just that John Vance had survived. It was how. The Union's elite forces, designed to suppress entire civilizations, were being outmaneuvered by one man. Every time they thought they had him pinned, he slipped through the cracks. Every trap failed. Every ambush was turned against them. He didn't just kill, he dismantled them piece by piece. SKRL had deployed an entire strike team of war mechs, designed to withstand planetary bombardments. They lasted less than 7 minutes. The shock troopers? Gone. The aerial drones? Shot out of the sky using their own weapons. The ground forces reported his last known location, a burning wreckage of what used to be a Union command post. John Vance was still alive. Admiral, one of his officers, whispered. We have another issue. SKRL turned, his thorax vibrating in irritation. What now? The officer hesitated before speaking. The humans have gone silent. That sent a ripple of unease through the bridge. No demands? No warnings. SKRL asked. Nothing. SKRL's mandibles twitched. He had studied human warfare extensively. They were known for psychological tactics, for using deception, for striking when least expected. And yet, this silence felt different, calculated. They've gone silent, SKRL murmured, his claws tightening. Because they already know. Know what, sir? The officer asked. SKRL exhaled slowly. That we're already dead. The exterminatus fleet was assembled. 50 dreadnoughts, armed with planetary cleansing weaponry capable of erasing Earth from existence. The order had been given, and there was no turning back. From orbit, the first strike was prepared, a kinetic obliteration rod, a weapon so devastating that one impact could shatter a continent. The Union had used it before, though never on a species as advanced as humanity. The countdown began. 10. The human homeworld spun below them, oblivious. 9. The fleet's commanders prepared for the moment that would define history. 8. Every government, every world, every colony watched. 7. And then, 6. Something shifted. 5. The fleet's sensors picked up something unusual. 4. Not an attack, not a fleet. 3. But a signal. 2. It was a recording. 1. And when it played, the entire Galactic Union fell into silence. John Vance's voice. If you come for my home, you better finish the job. Because if you don't, the signal cut out. And then the human fleet appeared. They hadn't been hiding. They had been waiting. 1,000 warships emerged from hyperspace, positioned perfectly between the exterminatus fleet and Earth. They didn't fire immediately. They didn't need to, because now the Union realized what they had done. They had started a war with the one species that never surrendered. On the bridge of his flagship, SKRL felt his exoskeleton tighten with dread. His mandibles clacked softly. "The humans didn't go silent," he whispered. His officers turned toward him, their eyes wide. They were listening. A notification blinked across the command screen. "Incoming transmission from Earth." It was one sentence. "You killed his wife." And then, the first human shots were fired. The war had begun. The battlefield was no longer just a planet or a city. It was the stars themselves. The exterminatus fleet had arrived to end Earth, to erase humanity with fire and steel, but they had made one fatal miscalculation. John Vance was still alive, and humanity had been watching. The first human warships didn't announce their arrival with grand speeches or threats. They simply emerged from hyperspace in a formation so precise it sent shockwaves through the enemy ranks. Not a single wasted movement, not a single erratic signal. Silence. A silence that spread like a disease, an unsettling weight pressing down on every alien soldier, every Union admiral, every planetary governor who had ever dared to call humans primitive. John Vance had carved his way through their greatest warriors. But now humanity had come, and the Union finally understood. They had spent centuries waging wars against enemies that surrendered. They had fought empires that bowed when faced with annihilation. Humans didn't surrender. They ended wars. And they did it with a cold, unrelenting precision that made the most brutal warlords in the galaxy seem like mere amateurs. The first dreadnought exploded before the Union even had time to register it was under attack. A single railgun round. A weapon that should have been obsolete in the face of advanced energy-based warfare. But humans had never abandoned kinetics. They had simply perfected them. The impact ripped through the ship's core, shattered its shields, and sent debris raining down into the atmosphere of the Union homeworld below. Panic set in. Admiral Esquirel tried to regain control of his forces, screaming orders, demanding formations, demanding anything to keep them from being torn apart. But the Union had never fought like this before. Human warships didn't advance in rigid lines. They hunted. A swarm of strike craft zipped through the battlefield, weaving between capital ships, targeting weak points with mathematical precision. Their movement patterns weren't erratic. They were calculated, adjusted mid-flight, adapting in real time. The moment a Union ship fired, 3 human ships were already moving to counter before the blast even landed. One after another, the dreadnoughts fell. Explosions bloomed in the void like dying stars, their silent shockwaves rippling through the wreckage. And still, the humans never spoke. The Union forces screamed into their comms, demanding explanations, demanding mercy, demanding to know how one man had brought an entire empire to its knees. The answer was simple. They had killed his wife. And now, there was no mercy. John Vance wasn't aboard any of the human warships. He was already inside the last Union command vessel, walking through its blood-stained corridors, a pistol in one hand, a stolen plasma rifle in the other. The corridors were lined with bodies. None had been spared. John moved with the same quiet efficiency he had on Earth, through mafia hideouts, through assassins' dens, through warlords' fortresses. It was all the same. A target was a target. A kill was a kill. A promise was a promise. He had promised them hell, and hell had arrived. The Supreme Chancellor Valek cowered in his private chamber, hands shaking as he watched the security feeds. His finest warriors had vanished, their bodies left where they fell. And John Vance was coming. His guards tried to stand their ground, but it didn't matter. They were already dead. John entered the room without hesitation. The guards fired. John moved. He slid forward, firing 2 shots before his feet touched the ground, each bullet finding its mark with eerie precision. 2 bodies dropped. 2 left. John let them come to him, sidestepping the first, using the momentum of the second against him, flipping him over and snapping his arm before planting a bullet in his skull. The last one ran. John shot him in the back. Valek was alone now. He had never felt fear like this before. For all his power, for all his armies, he was still a coward. John walked toward him, his footsteps slow, deliberate. The Supreme Chancellor raised his hands, trembling. Please," he stammered. I can give you anything you want." John Vance stopped. He tilted his head slightly. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. And then, softly, so softly it barely registered as speech, he whispered, "You took everything from me." Vela gasped as John raised the pistol, pressing it against his forehead. Wait. The gunshot ended him. And with that, the Galactic Union died. John Vance stood still for a long moment, watching the Chancellor's body slump to the floor. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, only an ending. The war was over before it had truly begun. The human fleet did not need to continue their assault. The moment the Chancellor's death was confirmed, the entire Galactic Union collapsed. Governments surrendered en masse, their leaders knowing there was no negotiating with ghosts. The war crimes they had committed against humanity, the arrogance with which they had executed an innocent diplomat, had cost them everything. John left the chamber, stepping over bodies, reloading as he walked. By the time he reached the landing pad, Rachel was there, waiting. Her expression was unreadable. John stopped in front of her. He looked at her, not with victory, not with satisfaction, but with something empty, something distant. "They surrendered," Rachel whispered, watching the news feeds. "They just gave up." John didn't respond. The weight of it all pressed down on him, as heavy as the grave itself. His wife was still gone. No amount of revenge would change that. Rachel hesitated before speaking again. What now? John considered the question. For so long, his purpose had been singular. Now he wasn't sure. But he did know one thing. He holstered his pistol, looking out at the ruins of what had once been the most powerful government in the galaxy. And then, in that calm, steady voice that had haunted the nightmares of 1,000 dying men, he answered, "I go home."